ordinary shopping trip turned into a nightmare when a police officer crossed the line, but he had no idea who was coming? Watch till the end. Subscribe and comment where you're watching from. The morning sun filtered softly through the windows of their quiet Santa Monica home, painting golden patches across the hardwood floors. The air smelled faintly of ocean breeze and freshly brewed coffee. It should have been a peaceful day, uneventful, the kind of day meant for reading by the window or walking hand in hand along the beach. But sometimes, peace is only the quiet before the storm. John Cena moved through the kitchen in black sweatpants and a fitted gray t-shirt, his towering frame still as powerful and composed as it had been in his wrestling prime. Though the arenas were behind him, the discipline hadn't left. His movements were still precise, his mind still wired to protect. Across the room, his wife sat near the window, wrapped in a light cardigan. Her name was Catherine, and she was the strongest woman he knew, but in a way the world didn't often recognize. She didn't throw punches, she didn't lift hundreds of pounds, but every day, she carried the weight of pain most couldn't imagine. Catherine suffered from chronic spinal deterioration. Every step sent a dull ache through her hips. Every shift of her body sparked a sharp reminder that her independence was slowly slipping away. There were days she could barely get out of bed, but she never let it define her. Not when John was around. Not when she could still fight for slivers of normal. She glanced over at her husband, her fingers loosely cradling a ceramic mug of tea. "I was thinking," she began softly, "maybe I'll go to the store today just to get some air, pick up a few things." John paused, looking up from the skillet. "I can go. I was going to head out later anyway." "No," she said gently. "I want to go. Just me." There was a pause. He looked at her closely, reading not just the words but the resolve behind them. He knew her battles weren't just physical. They were emotional, mental. She needed to feel useful, capable, in control. "Okay," he said finally. "But let me help you to the car at least." She smiled faintly. "Deal." Minutes later, Catherine stood by the door, dressed in soft jeans and a cream-colored sweater, her walking cane in one hand and a folded list of groceries in the other. John stood behind her, adjusting the scarf around her neck, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. His hands lingered for a moment on her shoulders. "You sure you're up for this?" "I'm sure." He helped her down the steps slowly, steadying her as she climbed into the driver's seat of the car. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel, but she masked it with a calm smile. "I'll be back before lunch," she said. "Text me if you need anything." She nodded, then eased the car down the driveway and turned toward the small neighborhood market just 10 minutes away. John stood watching long after the taillights had disappeared. Catherine drove slowly, carefully. The streets were familiar, lined with palm trees swaying gently in the morning breeze. As she parked near the entrance of the store, she exhaled deeply. Even the short trip had taken more energy than she liked to admit, but she was here. She had made it. The small grocery store smelled of warm bread and citrus. She took a small basket and walked slowly through the aisles, placing apples into the bag one by one, carefully selecting each one. A carton of milk, fresh herbs, a few vegetables, nothing heavy, nothing she couldn't carry. By the time she reached the checkout, her legs trembled. But she stood straight, offered the cashier a smile, and paid with slow precision. Outside, the sunlight had grown brighter, bouncing off the windshield of the cars. Catherine stepped onto the pavement, the brown paper bag cradled in one arm, her cane tapping gently with each step. She didn't notice the police cruiser until she was halfway across the lot. It sat idling across the aisle, black and white, quiet. The windows rolled down, the officer inside leaned back, sunglasses on, fingers drumming idly against the steering wheel. Officer Kyle Styson, mid-30s, lean with a thick jaw and the kind of gaze that lingered too long. His eyes landed on Catherine and something shifted in his posture. Weak. Alone, easy. He straightened up, shifted the cruiser into gear, and rolled forward. Back at home, John cleaned the dishes slowly, methodically, but every few minutes he glanced at his phone. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Still no text, no ping, no all-done message. He walked to the window, staring down the street. Something twisted in his chest, but he told himself to wait. Catherine had asked for space, for independence. He would give it to her, but the feeling didn't go away. At the store, Catherine was nearly at her car when she heard the engine behind her. A presence pressed in, a shadow growing. She turned. "Ma'am," a voice called out, sharp, commanding. He saw the badge first, then the mirrored sunglasses, Officer Stunson. Yes, she asked, her voice cautious. What do you have in the bag? Groceries, she answered, puzzled. Is there a problem? You're walking funny, acting strange. You mind showing me what's in there? I'm not acting strange, she said, adjusting her grip on the cane. I have a condition, my spine. Stetson stepped forward, too close. Beside, I want to see the bag. There's nothing. Before she could finish, his hand darted out and grabbed the top of the bag, yanking it from her arm. The seam tore open, the contents spilling across the pavement. Milk rolled away, apples bounced, one splitting open on impact. Catherine froze. I didn't steal anything, she said quickly, voice shaking. I paid for all of it. No receipt, Stenson said, grinding his boot into one of the apples. No proof. That's what I see. I do have a receipt, she fumbled, reaching into her pocket. But he had already decided. The moment he saw her, alone, slow, fragile, he had decided. He grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back. Out, please stop, my bag. You're resisting, he snapped. I could arrest you right now. Yep, please. He spun her, pushing her roughly against the side of her own car. Her cheek slammed into the glass, the paper bag long forgotten on the pavement. Her knees buckled, the pain in her spine exploding as she cried out. Her voice was soft, helpless, the kind of sound that could crush a heart. But there was no mercy in his hands, no pause, no restraint. And in that moment, just before the steel of handcuffs closed around her wrists, a sound sliced through the morning air. The growl of an engine, the screech of tires, and a black SUV came to a violent stop just yards away. The door burst open. John Cena stepped out. His shadow fell across the lot like a storm cloud. His eyes locked on Catherine, pinned against the car, her body trembling, her hands pulled behind her back. He didn't speak. Not yet. He simply walked. Deliberate, focused, silent. And the man who had once stood before tens of thousands, who had faced giants in the ring, now walked not as a performer, not as a showman, but as a husband. And someone was about to learn what it meant to touch the wrong woman. The moment stretched like a blade, the sun above warm and indifferent. The sound of tires grinding against the asphalt still echoed faintly in the background, but the air between them had frozen solid. Catherine's cheek was pressed against the window of her car. Her wrist screamed beneath the weight of the steel cuffs. Her back, already fragile, was on fire from the cruel shove against the door. Her voice had fallen silent. There was no point in begging anymore. He heard the cruiser door slam shut. The boots approached with rhythm, steady, heavy, a calculated swagger in the officer's gait as he turned toward the figure exiting the black SUV. John Cena didn't run. He didn't need to. His walk alone was enough. Like a building approaching, like judgment moving closer. Kyle Stinson had no idea who he was dealing with. He just saw a large man walking with dangerous purpose, so he squared his shoulders, puffed his chest, and reached instinctively for his belt. "It's step back," Stetson called out, raising his voice. "Police matter. You don't want to get involved, sir." Senna's eyes never left Catherine. Her eyes met his for a second, filled with panic, pain, humiliation, and something inside him clicked. A cold shift. A silence that had nothing to do with calm. That was not just his wife in pain. That was everything he had ever sworn to protect, being destroyed in broad daylight. "You need to back up now," Stetson barked again, hand hovering near his holster. Cena finally stopped walking, just a few feet away. "I'm giving you one chance." His voice came low, steady, and unmistakably final. "Let her go." Stetson sneered. "Or what?" Cena didn't answer. He stepped forward again. That was enough. Stetson reached for his baton, but he never got the chance to draw it. Cena moved with terrifying speed. One hand shot forward, gripping Stetson's wrist mid-Maynair, twisting it at an unnatural angle. The crack echoed like a snapped branch. Stetson screamed, the baton falling to the pavement with a hollow clang. Then the other hand came, an open palm straight to the sternum. The blow sent the stone stumbling backward into the side of the cruiser, breath knocked clean from his lungs. He gasped, wheezing, trying to recover, but Cena was already there. Fist closed, elbow rotating, shoulder aligned. The next blow was a punch that connected with precision, right below the jaw. Stetson's head snapped back and he crumpled to the ground, dazed, groaning. Catherine slumped against the car, her knees buckling. John moved to her immediately, uncuffing her with the keys hanging from Stetson's belt. The handcuffs clattered onto the asphalt. Her hands were red, swollen wrists bruised, her back trembled with aftershocks of pain. "I've got you," John whispered, catching her as she fell against him. She sobbed into his chest, not from the physical pain, but from the shame of having been rendered helpless, of being degraded, on display like a criminal in front of strangers. And still, people were watching. Phones were out, recording. A small crowd had formed by the sidewalk, too afraid to intervene but too fascinated to look away. Their murmurs filled the air like insects. Someone finally called for an ambulance. But Cena wasn't done. While he turned, Spencer was getting up, spitting blood, reaching for something at his side. Cena saw the motion, his body moved on instinct. In 3 steps, he was on him again. Stetson drew the pistol, but Cena's hand clamped over his wrist, forcing the muzzle upward. A shot fired aimless into the air. People screamed. With a vicious twist, Cena disarmed him, tossing the gun far across the lot, out of reach. Crazy. Stetson began trying to scramble back, but he didn't finish. Cena's foot pinned him by the chest to the pavement, his weight deliberate, his eyes burning. "You think a badge lets you hurt people like her?" Cena growled, voice rough and guttural. "You thought no one would come, that no one would fight back." Stetson's breath came in short bursts, his mouth moved but no sound came. His limbs twitched beneath the weight pressing him down. A flash of fear passed through his eyes. Cena saw it, and that's when he stepped off. "Get up," he said. Thiessen rolled onto his side, coughing, clutching his shoulder. He looked up as if expecting another hit, but none came. Cena turned back to Catherine, who had slowly lowered herself to the ground, leaning against the tire of their car. Her breathing was still shallow, her face streaked with tears, hair clinging to her cheeks. Her cane lay a few feet away, bent from the fall. He picked it up, strained it as best he could, then crouched beside her. She looked at him, shame flickering in her gaze. I couldn't stop him." John shook his head. "You shouldn't have to." The paramedics arrived moments later, rushing toward them. Someone tried to speak to Cena, an officer from a separate unit, but John wasn't listening. He didn't care about protocols or statements or reports. All he cared about was Catherine. They helped her into the ambulance, checked her spine, her pulse, her neck. John rode beside her, never letting go of her hand. Later that day, they returned home. Catherine lay curled up on the couch, blankets covering her legs, an ice pack resting against the curve of her lower back. Her face was pale, her eyes unfocused. John sat in the chair nearby, leaning forward, hands clasped. The house was silent, but it was a different silence now. Not the peace of mourning, but the stillness after violence. She tried to speak, but he raised a hand. "Not now," he said gently. "You rest." She closed her eyes. And in that quiet moment, John's mind wandered, not to the chaos of the parking lot, but to the look in Stetson's eyes as he lay on the ground, that flicker of rage behind the fear, that unspoken promise. This isn't over. Cena's jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists, because if that man came near Catherine again, there would be no warning next time, only reckoning. The evening sun filtered in through the high windows, warm and soft, painting long amber shadows across the quiet living room. The air was still, too still. It was the kind of silence that crept into the bones, thick with unspoken questions and buried emotions, the kind that settles after the storm but before the next strike of lightning. John Cena stood at the kitchen counter, his massive frame hunched slightly as he carefully poured 2 glasses of water. Every movement was slow, controlled, purposeful. The only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant tick of the wall clock. Across the room, Catherine lay on the couch, propped up by pillows, a folded blanket over her legs, an ice pack nestled against the aching base of her spine. Her eyes were open, fixed on nothing. Her fingers idly twisted the edge of the throw as if trying to keep her mind tethered to something tangible. Her bruises had darkened. Her wrists, once pale and soft, now bore the red and purple stains of steel and violence. Her back still spasmed with pain every time she shifted, but it was her expression, quiet, distant, that unsettled John most. He brought her the water and knelt down beside her, offering the glass wordlessly. She took it with a nod, her fingers trembling as she lifted it to her lips. "I didn't see him coming," she said softly, voice raw. John didn't answer. He sat down on the floor beside her, leaning back against the couch, his arms resting on his knees. "I thought I could handle it. Just one errand, one little trip. You were doing nothing wrong, John said. Don't blame yourself. I should have screamed sooner, moved faster, fought harder. His jaw tightened. You did everything right. He's the one who should be ashamed. Catherine looked down at her hands. But I wasn't strong. John turned to her, his eyes locked on hers. That's not what strength looks like. She blinked, her mouth parting slightly. Strength, he said, voice quiet but firm, is getting up every day with pain and still choosing to try. Strength is walking into that store with your head held high, even when your body is begging you to stay in bed. Strength is surviving what he did to you without letting it destroy the light in you. Tears welled in her eyes. You think I'm strong, she whispered. I know you are. She exhaled shakily, then leaned her head back against a cushion. You were right, though. He won't stop. The way he looked at me, that wasn't a man doing his job. That was someone who enjoyed it. John didn't reply. He was thinking about the same thing, the way Stetson's mouth had curled when he ground his boot into an apple she had picked, the way he shoved her against the car, the way he locked her in cuffs like she was a threat, not a woman barely standing on her own. But it wasn't just the act, it was the arrogance. The belief that no one would stop him, that no one would care, that she didn't matter. John's eyes dropped to his own hands, scarred from years in the ring, rough from hours in the gym, hands built for power, for control. But that day, when he saw Catherine pinned and silent, those hands had become something else. Weapons. He hadn't planned it, he hadn't hesitated, the violence was instinctual. And he would do it again. You regret it, she asked, her voice fragile, what you did to him? No. There was no hesitation, no doubt. I wish I'd gotten there sooner. Catherine closed her eyes. They're probably building a case against you now. I don't care. You could be arrested. I don't care. She looked at him again. You could lose everything, John. His jaw worked. She stared at him, the emotion rising again in her chest, thick and burning. You don't have to protect me from everything. He turned to face her fully. I don't protect you because I have to, Kat. I do it because I love you, and because you deserve a world where people like that don't win. The weight of his words pressed between them like gravity. Then, quietly, she reached for his hand. He took hers gently, holding it in his massive palm like something sacred. Outside, the world went on. Cars passed, children laughed somewhere down the block. A neighbor watered his lawn. But a few miles away, in a dimly lit police station, the atmosphere was anything but normal. Kyle Stinson sat in the corner of the locker room, his shoulder wrapped in a brace, his uniform shirt stained with blood and dust. His face was bruised, jaw tight with pain, but his eyes, they were alive with something else entirely. Humiliation, hatred. He had watched the videos. Someone had posted the whole thing online. It was already spreading. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, thousands of comments. That's John Cena. That officer should be fired. He got what he deserved. And the worst ones. Hero saves his wife from abusive cop. A hero. It was a slap to the face, a punch harder than any Cena had thrown. He had been a cop for 10 years. He had authority, a badge, a gun. And yet that man, that celebrity had dismantled him like a child. In front of everyone. His fingers curled into fists. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. They thought they could humiliate him, beat him, turn him into a meme. But he remembered Catherine's face too. The weakness, the frailty, the fear. And when the time was right, he would remind her what it meant to fear again. At home, night had fallen. Catherine was asleep now, her breath slow and steady, her chest rising and falling beneath the blanket. The living room was dark except for the warm glow of a lamp in the corner. John sat at the table, alone. His phone buzzed. He looked down. An email. Legal inquiry. He didn't open it. He already knew what it would say. Charges, civil claims, investigations. His fame wouldn't shield him from consequences. But if they thought fear would break him, they hadn't been paying attention. He stood up, crossed the room, and sat down next to Catherine, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. I won't let him near you again, he whispered. And he meant it. Across town, Kyle Stetson stared into the mirror above the sink in the locker room, his reflection warped by cracked glass. He looked at his swollen eye at the bruises. He touched his lip where blood had dried and crusted, and he smiled. A cold, soulless smile, because they hadn't seen the real him yet, but they would. The sun crept into their home slowly the next morning, as if hesitant to disturb the fragile peace that had settled like ash after a fire. Warm light crawled across the rug, touched the side of the couch where Catherine still rested, her breathing soft, her expression distant even in sleep. John stood in the hallway, his broad silhouette filling the doorway as he watched her. He hadn't slept. His body had gone through sleepless nights before WrestleMania, before grief, before war, but this one felt different. His eyes were red, not from exhaustion, but from knowing what was coming. He moved quietly to the living room and sat down on the edge of the couch, careful not to wake her. One hand reached for hers, resting gently over her fingers, still bruised from the handcuffs. He studied her face. The memory of her pinned to the car door, the panic in her eyes, the way her knees buckled as that coward's hands pressed into her, it played in his head over and over, and each time it did, something inside him burned hotter. She stirred. "Morning," she whispered hoarsely. He nodded. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, tight." Her hand reflexively moved to her back. John stood. "Let me get your meds." "No, not yet. I want to sit up." He helped her ease upward, adjusting the pillow behind her. She winced, but said nothing. She never did. They sat in silence for a moment, broken only by the faint chirp of birds outside and the occasional passing car. "Have you heard anything?" she asked eventually. He hesitated. "They sent over paperwork, probably lawsuits, maybe even charges. Doesn't matter." She looked at him. "Of course it matters, John." He sighed. "I know, but I don't regret it. You could lose everything. I already almost lost the only thing that matters." Catherine looked away. "If I hadn't gone out, if I just waited for you..." "Don't," he cut in. "Don't go there. He chose to do that. That's on him. I feel like I dragged you into a fight that didn't need to happen." John shook his head. "No, this fight has needed to happen for a long time. That man wears a badge, but what he did has nothing to do with law. That was power without accountability. He thought he could do it to you because you looked weak. He thought no one would come." And she was quiet for a moment. "But you did." "Yeah," he nodded. "And I always will." Across the city, in the back office of a precinct that reeked of burnt coffee and bureaucracy, Kyle Steenson sat in a chair, his arm in a sling and his face marked by swelling and gauze. His eyes, however, were alert, focused. Captain Moreno stood over him with a clipboard and a clenched jaw. "Body cam?" "Didn't activate," Stinson replied, voice flat. Witnesses say different. Witnesses filmed a brawl, not an arrest. He assaulted me because you were choking his wife against her vehicle." He resisted. Moreno dropped the clipboard on the desk with a loud slap. "Jesus, Kyle, she had a cane. She could barely walk. She was aggressive. Are you hearing yourself?" Kyle didn't blink. Moreno exhaled and leaned in. "This story is everywhere. National headlines. John Cena saves disabled wife from abusive cop. You understand how bad that looks for us?" "I was doing my job." "No, you were feeding your ego. You saw someone you thought was weak and tried to break them." Dedson's face twitched. "He broke my arm. You provoked him." There was a silence that stretched for too long. The air was tight between them. Then Moreno leaned back. "They want you gone. Internal affairs, city council, even the mayor's office is circling. You're a liability." Kyle's jaw clenched. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, quieter this time. Moreno shook his head. "That's the problem." He walked out, leaving Kyle alone with the echo of his own breathing. Back in Santa Monica, the afternoon was slow. The windows were open, letting in the warm breeze. Catherine sat by the table, carefully slicing strawberries. John was across from her, scrolling through his phone. "You're trending again," he said flatly. "Oh, God." "John Cena slams rogue cop to save wife. Video has 4.3 million views." He laughed weakly. "At least it's a good slam." He smirked. "Still got it. They try to pretend things were normal, they try to joke, but under the surface, the weight was there. The calls from journalists, the emails from legal reps, the silence from people they once called friends. It was all building." Catherine finished the fruit and set the knife down. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked softly. John's face hardened. "I hope not. But if he does, I'll be ready." She met his eyes. Promise me something. Anything. Don't lose yourself in this. He blinked. I know what it feels like to want revenge, she said. To want to punish someone for making you feel small, but don't let him turn you into something you're not. John nodded slowly, his throat tight. I won't, he whispered. But if he tries to touch you again, you won't have to fight alone. That evening, the sky turned orange and violet. They sat in the backyard as the sun dipped behind the palm trees. The smell of jasmine drifted on the wind. It should have felt peaceful. But in the pit of John's stomach, something still stirred, a weight, a presence, as if they were being watched. He stood and walked to the edge of the yard, scanning the street. Nothing. Yet the feeling remained. Catherine wheeled herself toward him. Her voice was soft. He's still out there. John looked at her, yeah. And he's angry. Let him be. She took his hand. We don't run. No, he said, we don't. Somewhere in a dark apartment filled with silence and rage, Kyle Stitson sat alone. At the table before him, his badge lay flat beside a cracked phone screen playing footage of his humiliation on loop. He watched it again and again and again. In the video, you could see it happen. His authority dismantled, his power destroyed, his name dragged through the dirt. All because of a woman with a cane and a man who thought he was a hero. Kyle picked up the badge and stared at it, and then dropped it into the trash. I'll make them pay, he whispered. Not with the law, not with rules. What with the pain they had made him feel? And he smiled in the dark, because the real war hadn't even begun yet. Back at home, John tucked Catherine into bed. She winced as she settled into the mattress. He leaned over her and kissed her forehead. I'm here, he said. I know. He reached to turn off the lamp. Her voice stopped him. John, yeah, don't ever let go. He took her hand and squeezed gently. He never. And the light went out, but the fire inside them both still burned. For love, for justice, for the battle they now knew was far from over. He defended what mattered most, but this fight isn't over yet. If this story moved you, like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to see it.